So, welcome everyone to Ask the Experts. Today's topic is about remote onboarding for new hires. And, if you haven't onboarded a remote person, you probably will in the near future. So, we thought and hope this is very timely for all of us. I am Catherine Lang-Cline, president and co-creator of Portfolio Creative. Portfolio Creative is an award-winning staffing and recruiting company that specializes in marketing. My partner in crime and COO of Portfolio Creative is Kristen Harris, and together we would like to welcome Sharon DeLay to our conversation.
Hey,
Sharon,
Kelsey, can you switch the slide?
Sharon is president and owner of Go-HR. She has many letters after her name, which means that she knows a lot about HR. And Sharon, we are thrilled that you're able to join us in the discussion. I want everyone to know that this is being recorded and will be available for your review.
Awesome. So we can jump in, and I think we'll switch from slides to just seeing our lovely faces because we want this to be more of a conversation. So welcome. And today, obviously, as Catherine said, we're talking about onboarding and especially onboarding remote employees, remote team members. So we're in this whole new world where companies are making all of their return to office plans. I put that in quotes because a lot of people are returning in various ways and not returning at all in some cases. So we're seeing a lot of different work scenarios. There's 100% in office. There's a lot of remote / hybrid in office, work from home, rotating schedules, all kinds of different hybrid plans that we're seeing. And if you're hiring or have recently hired, you have probably either hired a remote employee or at least onboarded your recent hires remotely because you very likely have been working from home like a lot of us. So, we all know that onboarding matters, or we believe, I guess I will say we believe onboarding matters and matters even more so with remote employees. But maybe we can jump in and talk about why we think that matters.
Absolutely. And if everyone would like, they can put in the chat about whether or not their company is still remote or if there is any sort of plan in place that would be helpful just for others to see kind of what's going on. Mostly because a lot of people always ask us, so what's everybody else doing? So if we have a lot of like minds out there, we can definitely direct conversations towards that. So while people are answering, let's talk about onboarding new hires. Sharon, why is onboarding so important in general?
So I don't think it's necessarily the most important thing you can do when you bring on a new employee, but I certainly think it's incredibly critical, especially right now while we're trying to reconnect and get back into the workplace. And so I would say it's akin to kind of the courting phase. Interviewing is the courting phase, onboarding is kind of the honeymoon phase. And it's where the relationship really starts forming for an employer and an employee. And if we don't get it right in these first two phases, kind of that interviewing and onboarding, probably setting up a relationship that's going to end in some level of failure as the relationship progresses. So it's pretty important, not the most important, but pretty important in the overall employee life cycle in an organization.
That is so fun to think of it as the honeymoon. We saw a statistic and basically it said like, no one will be happier working for your company than on their first week. And it was something like after the first week, their enthusiasm drops by 30% or something.
Oh, wow.
So like that first week, they are the most excited they ever will be. And so you're trying to, continue that, right? Like you said, you want it to be a good marriage.
Right. Like let's hope marriages don't drop 30% in satisfaction after the first week. Give it a month or so.
Hey, I don't know, maybe. If we're going to start, talking off script, I could talk about my first marriage. I knew pretty early on.
During that first week, perhaps. So her onboarding wasn't great, let's just say. So, right. So we all believe onboarding is super important, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But why is remote onboarding different? It's important, but I think it's harder.
I think it's harder just because you're not sitting face to face, right? I mean, that's really an important connection point for a lot of people. But as you both noted at the beginning of this, that's going to change a lot. And we're not always going to get that opportunity to be sitting across the table from somebody. But I think the items of onboarding are fundamentally the same, but how we do it will be different from, with those remote employees. It's again, equally important, but the lack of face-to-face time can amplify the fact that you're remote and could translate to some people as being alone. And we're starting to hear a lot of that out there and see a lot of companies start investigating how to increase that face time, but also how to ensure that their employees have some of those mental health opportunities, either as a benefit or just, again, those connection opportunities to help with the mental health. Because remote onboarding does create a sense of disconnect from day one if it's not done correctly.
Yeah. It needs to be more structured, it seems like. I don't know about you guys, but I remember starting many jobs where you just showed up and they're like, oh, you'll be staying here. Or maybe didn't even have that sorted out in some cases. They're like, you'll be staying here. And that person next to you, yeah, they'll tell you what to do.
Right.
Right.
You were surrounded by a bunch of people who already knew what was going on.
And it's kind of like, and you're right, because I remember starting a couple jobs where I was thrown into the deep end to swim. And that for me works really well. I'm a problem solver and I'm challenged by figuring out those problems, like where is the supply closet or who am I supposed to talk to today? But I'm also here to tell you it doesn't work for most people, and they do need that connection. And I think what I would also like to point out early on is onboarding and orientation are fundamentally two separate activities. Orientation is typically like the first 2 to 3 days of the employment relationship, where you do the paperwork, get your desk assignment, get all your technology signups. Onboarding really is a longer term process. And some companies, I think it's Zappos, and you guys can tell me if I'm, this. Zappos is up to a year for their onboarding process.
That is correct. And I'm even going to say that, considering, people are working more remote, that may be more typical across the board. And some of the specifics of this is definitely in our white papers. We do have like a step-by-step schedule of what would be a great way, or at least what we believe to be a great way of bringing people on board, some of which has worked for us, some of which we've gotten from experts. So definitely take that, give that a look when you are ready to onboard somebody, or when you're trying to put together your own onboarding plan. Just a lot of great things in there. Like I said, some successes on our part as well. And also, if people have any questions at all while we're going through this, put it in the chat. We're going to answer them as we go if it's something that is, timely, or we can answer them at the end. But otherwise, we're just going to kind of keep rolling with this, and, you feel free to jump in. We would like this to be a little bit of a discussion too, not just us talking at you. So definitely feel free to just jump right in.
So Sharon, I know that you shared with us when we were chatting before some of the challenges maybe you've seen with your clients, and we certainly will share some we've seen too. But I think you said you work with a lot of smaller businesses, and maybe that makes it even harder.
So smaller businesses, gosh, and I really hate to kind of generalize, but I do think smaller businesses are used to kind of that more collaborative, hands-on, close working approach. It's kind of in our DNA that we all do everything all day long. It's that entrepreneurial mindset. And that includes being in the office to work together from day one, from, morning until midnight sometimes. So I think that we kind of have that mentality of people are going to be at the desk next to us or the office next to us, and collaboration and kind of osmosis will train and develop the teams. And the onboarding process, I think, probably forces everybody to be a lot more deliberate in their thought process. We have to stop and think. And for entrepreneurs that generally work on everything's on fire kind of way of doing business, stopping and thinking and being very deliberate is real hard work. And so we have to give extra attention and time to really stopping, really thinking, really being deliberate in how we bring new people on, because osmosis is just not going to happen in a remote environment. Not the way we're used to it happening by sitting next to each other.
Yeah, and the one thing that I definitely want to mention too at this point is that, people ask us because we have people that work remotely, when we place people with companies, they're a little hesitant to saying that we're a remote person. We want them to be here so we can see them and make sure that they're working, because if they're working from home, how do we know that they're actually working? Or are they just billing me and I have no idea what they're up to? And I think that has been the true test, kind of with this pandemic. When everybody was sent home, you actually had to, if you're a business owner, had to kind of trust your team and say, okay, this is no choice of mine, but everybody's going to have to go home. And they were able to keep the company going. They figured it out, and you had to kind of trust them. And you did, I'm hoping, did trust them. So when people are asking, how do I know my people are working from home? You either have a team that did it, or if you had them in the office and you weren't sure, how do you know that they're working in the office though, too?
Right.
Because there are many times where, and I am not saying this a pro or against this, but people will, maybe do a little shopping while they have a break in action, or they had to look up the phone number of something that they're going to need for later. So they're not constantly working necessarily if they're in the office either. So how do you make it, how do you get it to your own comfort level is, with knowing that they're being productive. And again, that's also outlined in our white papers a little bit, and we'll probably touch on that going into this a little further, but that's the first question I think you have to kind of ask yourself is, do I trust my team? If you don't trust your team, are they the right people? And what are you doing as far as markers or goals to see that they're being productive?
And I think that is a perfect question, because we get that question all the time is, if I send people home to work remotely, how do I know they're working? And my first question always back is what you just said, Catherine. How do you know they were working when they were sitting down the hallway? So again, it goes back to, you have to be much more deliberate now in your thought process. And I think accountability is going to become probably the big key word in 2021, 2022. How do we hold people accountable? How do we as the business owners or the managers provide those working opportunities where our team members can be productive? However, we can't lose track of the fact that the workplace for many people was also a social outlet for them. And they've lost that in a lot of cases. And that social outlet was, sticking your head in somebody else's office and chatting, gathering in the workspace or the kitchen and catching up on your weekend. And there's a lot of value to that. And sometimes we forget the value to those types of interactions, but they really do build that team, and they really do build that group of people who want to work together and work for the better of a company. So that trust that you're talking about comes in part from those social interactions.
From building those relationships. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that, when you said like there's orientation and there's onboarding, like orientation is like filling out paperwork and everybody has to do that. But the onboarding includes like making those connections and building those relationships. And like you said accountability is the key word. Like you have to set the expectations. How can someone be accountable when they don't even know what the expectations are yet? Like they read a job description, but that doesn't tell them what your weekly expectations of them are. Like that all has to come out in onboarding them into the role and into the company.
If a job description truly told somebody what their job really was, it would be 1,000 pages. I mean, let's be honest. Yeah. So you're right. That interaction, that engagement really fills out kind of the bones of the job description for most people.
And I think some things that job descriptions lack is expectations. I mean, I think it outlines what it is they want you to do, but with what expectation? Is it, collaborative? Is it timely? Is it you have to deliver things this way to this person? And that sort of flow now has to be communicated, because you are not collaborating on that 8-hour-a-day level to make sure that is clear. So it is a matter of making sure that these conversations are really thorough, communication is very clear, and a lot of things are really outlined, because I can tell you too that they're not going to remember everything. So if things are outlined, if they are scheduled, calendar invites are outstanding as far as check-ins with your team. So at the very beginning, set some of those things up, like these are the times that we're going to meet and I'm going to check in, or you're going to meet with each person in this company over the next 20 weeks. And it's going to be a 1 hour, 15-minute, whatever you want meeting for that person to tell you how long they've been here, what they do, what they expect from you, things like that. So really relying on calendars, communication, outlines, because now it has to happen in a remote world versus it happens, as you're passing in the hallway saying, hey, let's get together for lunch, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
More
absolutely.
purposeful. Like you said, I think everything you're talking about is just being more purposeful about it. Like not relying on it casually happening.
Absolutely. And I don't know, Sharon, are there other insights that you might have in the business community that people have as far as the fear of the remote worker? You talked about them feeling like they're not working.
Right. I mean, I kind of go back to figure out what you want to focus on. Is it really that you want to focus on somebody not having their butt in the seat next door? Or is it time to start focusing on their morale, their productivity, their engagement, those things that we've talked about for a decade or more of being important, but it has truly been more lip service than action. And I think that in addition to accountability becoming a thing, I think as business owners, as leaders in our organizations, we're going to have to start focusing on development of our teams in a different way. Development certainly of our managers to manage our teams in a certain way. But what I've been surprised to not hear is it's been less about I'm paying a lot of rent and I want people back in here, and more about that fear of lack of control over people. So it goes back to that trust factor. And there are, from the employee's perspective, I will tell you their fear with working remotely is their increased costs that they're going to encounter. We're hearing a lot about that.
Talk about that a little bit more.
I know this isn't exactly some of the stuff that we talked about, but we do hear employees talking about, I'm going to be using my own resources and I don't have a home office deduction claim anymore. Can the company help me? And that's a completely different conversation than most employers have been willing to have or have had to have. I look at my team. So there are 6 of us all together. And I'm in HR, so I'm naturally paranoid and compliance driven. I'm just gonna put that out there. And I issue laptops and monitors for all of my people. So we all have dual monitors, they all have laptops. Part of that is it's my company, my resources. So I want to make sure I have control over that. I give technology allowances. I've set up an Amazon business account for ordering office supplies. Those types of things, because I don't want my employees to feel like they're paying part of the cost of operating the company.
Yeah, and that could immediately be disenchanting, I think, for a new employee too. It's like you're setting them up at home, and maybe you did provide them with a laptop and a lamp, but they, really don't have a good place to work. And talking about some of these fears, I can tell you just from my conversations with some of the companies at the chamber, they are talking about that. It maybe not initially, but they are now talking about that office space in a bunch of different ways. Do I give up our space? Do we convert it to something that's more like a hotel space? Meaning that people just kind of check in and sit wherever they want, which has a whole other level of controversy that we could get into at another time. But even just talking about, okay, now I have people working from home and I have things at the office for them to use, chairs and computers and things like that. Do I also have to provide that at home too? There's companies, around town that are helping with that by having like these kits that you can buy for your employees where you get a filing cabinet, a desk, and a computer stand or something like that for a set price, which I think is kind of brilliant, at least from my standpoint, owning a business. If somebody needs that, I could just order this up and they can figure out where to put it in their home. But that is some of the things that they're talking about as far as, do I have to have 2 spaces now for people? And does it have to be an
So I'm not really saving
and,
anything because now
or
I'm setting up
nothing.
2 workspaces.
Yeah. So, those are just other things that owners have to think about, and people managers when, they're onboarding people. Can they get on our network? That's some of the things that Chris and I have run into when we have remote workers, is that there is this back and forth with their IT department trying to get just the computer to work, or, making sure everybody has a quiet place to work and things like that, which is why I think we might end up settling somewhere in a hybrid space. But people will be working from home, and, we have to make sure that they are feeling just as part of the company now as they did before.
And I think you're bringing up a good point. You guys call it remote first. Is that the phrase you guys use?
Yes.
Which I really like that, because it emphasizes your primary way that you bring people in and value them. But you said that you're also going to have some kind of space where they can go if they want to. But think about the messaging of having those office supplies there for them, or the resources for them to order those supplies. Think about the messaging of the care that it demonstrates. You're going to be buying those office supplies regardless of whether they're at their home or whether they're at your Class A commercial building, Class B commercial building, whatever that looks like. You're going to be buying those resources anyways. Think about the message it sends to those new employees when you say, look, here's how you order your office supplies. Yes, I have a step in place where I approve it or deny, but you have that empowerment and my trust to order what you need to do your job.
Exactly.
Yeah, that messaging is so important. I feel like a big part of this, onboarding conversation, or, the importance of the onboarding, is taking away questions, like answering questions they have, but maybe answering questions they didn't even think to ask. But like all of these kind of things, like, am I getting equipment? Are you sending it to me? How will I set it up? Where do I get staples? Like all these kind of things that maybe someone will ask, or even if they're not asking, they're wondering it. Like, oh, this is a remote job. Do I have to work on my own computer, which might be fine or not? Maybe I don't even own a computer. Maybe I only have an iPad or something,
Right.
I think that the more questions you can answer or like proactively head off during that, initial onboarding period, the less worried the person is. That's just like one more thing they're not wondering and worrying about. Like taking a new job is stressful. I don't care how excited they are, how much it pays, it's a promotion, whatever. It's always stressful to start a new job. It's exciting too, but there's a level of stress. And the more of this that you cover and just answer for them, that's stress you're reducing, or questions they're starting to have about, should I have taken this job? You can eliminate those.
Absolutely. Well, just imagine how your employee's going to feel if, you're hired. Here's everything you need to sign. And oh, by the way, we have everything taken care of. And here's how you do all of that. And there is really no worry to a lot of that little detail stuff, which leads me up to how not to do it and the mistakes. Because what's great about webinars like this is that we get to talk about the mistakes that have happened, and hopefully you can avoid them because somebody else has already learned the lesson. So
not name names, but we all have
we
seen
cannot name names
really poorly.
But yeah, some of them were doozies. I know, Kristen, you have a couple examples of this. So
yeah, we've seen a couple. I'm going to say, thankfully, these were not with our own employees, but in supporting clients trying to make this change. Just shipping equipment to someone without really any support or any way to help them get it working, which, yes, lots of, you get a computer, you open up, you turn it on, it works fine. But what if it doesn't? What if I can't connect to the network? What if I can't log in? Like you're asking me to call my internet provider and ask all these questions. And I'm just like overwhelmed right now thinking about it, so that's really hard. Just
And we've
sending
had
a computer is not onboarding someone.
And we've had
Right.
people say, well, wait for a call from IT, So, well, how many days is that going to be? Because clearly they're setting up a ton of people, and you're not necessarily the priority. So you
I'm
have a
just sitting here,
potential person sitting there for a week or two, not, just saying, with
Yeah.
absolutely no way to work, and
Yeah.
they, it went sour fast. So
we've seen people, I actually thought this was great. They were asked to come to the office on their first day so they could get all their equipment, meet people, but then they showed up and no one else was there. And their manager's like, oh, hi, I have to go into meetings all day. And they're like, oh, okay. First of all, why am I here? Second of all, did anybody know I was starting? Like, they just are already spinning up questions of, was this a bad idea? It's basically what they're asking themselves. Was this a bad idea? And the, same goes for if you don't really have any work for them, like in that first week, you don't have projects lined up. And I don't care if it's a project, someone else is already working on and you just have them partner with them, or, sit side by side and work with them, or like some just very, low risk kind of project, but you need them to get started doing something. Otherwise, again, they're thinking like, why was I hired? There doesn't seem to be anything for me to do. They just are starting to ask questions. And back to that, like, it's a honeymoon period. You don't want them asking questions about, should I have taken this job in the first week?
It's your honeymoon and no one shows up.
Yeah.
You're just sitting there.
Here I am in my hotel room by myself. Where's
by
my
myself?
spouse?
Is anyone else coming? Sharon, can you think about some
do you have
states off the top of your head?
I was gonna add to that. I think a lot of times, and again, I see this more in smaller companies. I think larger companies have a little bit more structure in their HR functions, many times, not always, many times.
It's a new day. It's a new day. I think it was at one time, I think, and that's the thing too. A lot of the things were not updated for this new reality we have right now.
I think the people who are challenged and trusted with the onboarding process sometimes are so used to the way things are, they don't think like a new employee. And so they forget those nuances that you brought up, Kristen. And I would say have an onboarding checklist, just like you have a termination checklist. And that onboarding checklist should be precipitated by an onboarding interview. So the last 3-5 people you've brought on board, ask them what their experience was, ask them what went well for them, what made them nervous, what made them anxious, and adjust that onboarding checklist to make sure it reflects the right experience from the new employee's perspective, not the tenured, maybe a little disenfranchised manager or owner's perspective. And the whole thing with having anything that they can do in week one, get an onboarding buddy that they can follow around.
Yes. Yeah.
And that can be remotely.
Oh, absolutely. And what's great about the buddy, which again is in our white paper on how that all works as well, but just briefly, there's always a person they can contact, no matter what, they are the person, and that person knows that they're responsible for that new hire too, because what I think sometimes happens too is that you always think somebody else has got it, and if there is not some sort of general, exact connection, the lines are drawn, people might think that somebody else has got it. Oh, I thought they had it, or I thought they understood, or I thought, but nobody knows for sure unless it's that buddy. And even that buddy does not have to know everything, but that buddy can get them the information. So they might have a question about their benefits or whatever. I'm not going to assume that maybe their manager might know that, but they can definitely get them connected with HR, maybe help them set up an appointment to make that happen. Just again, to know that they're really kind of taken care of and they don't have to worry about it. You focus on being the new person, and we're going to help you with the stuff that we know. That sort of rescue effort, I think, goes a long way.
Yes, and I love that the buddy is like, it's not their manager, because it's the person they can ask things maybe about their manager. How does Catherine like to be communicated with? Should I call her or email her? And then I can tell you, oh, you should email her and put it in bullet points. Keep it short and brief, and she is fast on email. She will get right back to you. Like, I can give you that tip, but you might feel intimidated asking Catherine that, or
if you
whatever.
send me a long email, I will read it later, but if it is short, I will answer right away. There you go.
So It's that person that you know, like that person who would have been sitting next to you that you'd lean over and be like, hey, how's this work around here? It's that person that you can ask those questions of, you know,
And
and they may
honestly,
be a
if you have to just,
peer or someone like that.
even if you just have to assign an admin or a project manager or something, somebody that just knows how to get a hold of everybody, that's fine too. You know,
It just knows how stuff works, right?
maybe the
Like,
friendliest person in your company, you know, pick that person. But you just wanted to make sure that it's, again, a good experience from that get-go, and they're not, you know, scrambling to try and find the person to get back to you.
it's
And
all the
and the
nuances you would not be able to put in that, or that you would put in that like 1,000-page job description. It's all those nuances that you can
right,
ask this
and
person.
that onboarding buddy, the added benefit of having that role in your company and moving it around to different people, you start developing your other leaders in the company
Absolutely. Well,
concurrently.
that's a good point. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's really great.
Also too, since, you know, we are, you know, the time is just flying, I do want to ask Sharon the question, like, what are employers legally required to do when it comes to onboarding?
So what I told you guys, one of the things I told you was I have to disclose I'm not an attorney, so I'm not allowed to give legal advice in case there are any attorneys out there listening.
From an HR perspective, we'll
From
say.
an HR perspective. So here's a lot of what we walk our employers through. And assuming everybody listening is in Ohio, honestly, Ohio is a business friendly state. You might not think that sometimes as a business owner, but it's pretty business friendly. And there's not a whole lot employers have to do, but there are things employers should want to do. And that's really what I think we should talk about. Obviously, employers have to give any kind of personal protective equipment. That is a legal requirement through OSHA. But
And what does
you're
that
not
mean when you say that?
so if a person, so as an employer, you're required to provide a safe workplace. That is becoming very gray,
I was
obviously,
going
when
to say,
people
what
are
does that
working
look
from their
like
homes.
when someone's in their home?
Right. That's very difficult. We will actually, when we write remote work agreements for our employers, we will disclose to the employee that if they report an accident in their home, they need to be prepared for us to come in and conduct an accident site investigation, just like we would in the workplace. I will tell you that does a lot to keep employees acting very safe because they don't want you in their home. So there's an added benefit to that, but you have to provide a safe workplace. I think we're going to have some challenges with that, quite honestly, as this whole remote working thing progresses on how that's defined. But that aside, there's nothing that requires you right now to provide laptops, phones, office supplies. It certainly can be a BYOD situation, which is bring your own device. I think from an employer's perspective, that's crazy thinking because you lose so much control over your data, your client information, your security. So I think as an employer, you would want to provide internet access in terms of like remoting in server or cloud storage space, the devices that get you there, the cell phones and the computers, at least the computers, maybe not the cell phones. I think you should have a remote work policy that outlines a lot of things, including what are the peak hours I expect you to be available to me. So, and my team, again, as an example, 9 to 3 is kind of our peak hours, where if I need to get a hold of my team member who's not on a scheduled time off from 9 to 3, if I don't see on their calendar, because we all share our calendars, that they are busy with a client, I should be able to reach them, right? They shouldn't be out walking their dog, or they shouldn't be out getting their hair dyed or anything like that. But the times before and the times after that are really blurred. And I actually learned this lesson from the creative industry. I walked into a marketing company one day and we were talking about a lot of their staff, and a lot of their staff, they were classified incorrectly. Again, I'm HR, so exempt and non-exempt becomes a big conversation for me. And the owners just didn't want to have anybody who was on an hourly schedule because they didn't want to be responsible for time tracking. And when I dug down deeper, it was because, well, you know, a lot of our employees like to come in around 10 after they've had a morning of meeting friends for breakfast or sleeping in or whatever it is, working out. They like to work for a few hours and then like to go out and have a lunch with their friends. Then they like to come back in and work for a few hours. And then they like to go for dinner or go play a game of basketball or go do whatever their hobby is. And then from 10 to midnight, they are online doing emails and stuff like that. To track that would be a nightmare for me. So just keeping them salary is easy. So I learned from that people, especially the generations coming into the workforce now, just work differently. And we have to be able to meet them there. So having a remote work agreement that sets out those expectations, Kristen, like you'd mentioned, is really critical.
Like, these are the times I need to reach you.
Right.
This is the amount I expect you to work. So that difference, you can figure out when it happens.
Right. Let's all be adults and trust. The communication channels that you're going to use. Is it going to be Teams? Is it going to be Hangouts? Is it going to be whatever, Slack, whatever those communication channels are? Define that, because again, when they're new to your company, they're not going to know. They may have used one at something else and assume everybody uses that.
And make sure that they know that in some cases, everybody can see their comments, because there was that story recently that came out about people just talking trash about management. Little did they know, because they didn't know, they've never used Slack before, that everybody can see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and remind them that the avoiding sexual harassment counts on those channels too.
Yes.
Only because I've been living that recently.
Oh, fun stuff.
Not that I want to plant a seed, but I do suspect if employers expect employees to buy and pay for all of their own office supplies and everything, there may be at some point down the road a case of, by forcing my employees to do that in certain jobs, did I just drop them below minimum wage?
You know what? That's an angle I never thought of, because I immediately was thinking, if this company is making me buy all this stuff, you know what? There's this other company over here that pays me around about the same amount, if not a little more, that's actually going to provide me with all of that too. That's all about retention too at that point.
Advantage, absolutely.
Yep. And it matters, right? It matters.
Absolutely.
That's the difference between a beer and not a beer on a Friday night.
So, and it's so funny that you brought up the scheduling of artists, and I will say you're welcome for us paving the way for the future of America and how we keep track of time, because all of that is absolutely true. And it is a much more loose schedules. And when we switched mostly to remote, this remote first, and we did it actually before that too, because we were, pretty, lax with keeping track of where people were and stuff like that, only because we gave people goals instead of, calculating their face time. Because that goes back to that person. And I remember, and I think, Kristen, Sharon, and myself at least remember when sitting in the office was how they knew whether or not you were working, which was ridiculous. You came in on time, you left late because that's what was the expectation, maybe ate at your desk, but people knew where to find you and you didn't wander off. And, it was not super pleasant, but that's how it was always done. And now it's different. I said, like I said, artists did pave the way on this, where we'd always be wandering off all the time, but
they cannot keep track of us. But I do think that
it was goals. We knew what had to be done, and sometimes we were working at midnight, because that's
ultimate, like, how project work. Like, a project has to be finished. It doesn't matter if it takes you 5 hours or 3 hours. You have a thing you're accomplishing.
Yep.
Right.
This is what you're paying me for.
Work is becoming more like that. Is that what you feel like, Catherine? It's becoming more. Work in general is more project oriented.
Right. And I would really encourage people to start looking at it that way too. Don't think about necessarily how many hours they're putting in. Think about what they're getting done. And if you don't think they're being productive enough, maybe you raise the goals and start talking about that. What else can you get done? What else can I hand off to you? And they will like the growth too. Don't think they're going to shy away from it.
Right. The gig economy is not just independent contractors growing in strength and managing their own working hours. It's also how we work. We work in fits and starts, if you really think about it, or in gigs, if you want to use that word. The only problem is, as an employer, you are still beholden to wage and hour laws. And that's the disconnect. And you can generally think of the federal government lagging about 10 years behind the way the workforce is going. 2020, though, I think really truly is going to force a lot of changes faster. And I think it's a good thing. I really do.
I
A
kind
couple,
of do.
yeah, a couple of other things to think about. I think as employers, you guys should talk to your insurance companies to understand any kind of liabilities you have, any recommendations, any tax benefits you get from giving those allowances. But the biggest thing we're seeing happen that employers are struggling with, I call it House Hunters International Syndrome. I don't know if that's the right way to reference it, but we watch a lot of House Hunters International and have these fantasies of moving off to an island someplace and working remotely for the rest of our life. And there's a danger from the employer side of that, because you have to make sure you're withholding taxes, following sick leave laws, paying unemployment taxes into the state where your employees are working. So they can't, and there's a lot of lead time in some cases of setting up in states. Arizona is a horrible state to set up in, as an example. New York can be a tough state to set up in, as an example. So
yeah, and you have to comply with that state's laws, which may be
right.
different than what you're used to. Yeah, we actually have experienced that too. And I think I love House Hunters International as a way of framing it, because I think, and rightfully so, people are like, well, I can work from anywhere, so I'm going to move here. We've had people like, oh, by the way, next week I'm moving to Indiana. Oh, okay. Well, we actually have to get set up to employ you in Indiana. Like, we're in Ohio, and so, like you said, some states are really easy, some are not, and they all have different, requirements of things that you need to comply with. And I don't think, especially smaller employers, are at all prepared.
They're not.
For what that means.
No,
and I have 20 people and they're in 10 different states. I don't think a small company is ready for what that really means.
And that means time zone changes too. I mean, little stuff like that, is everybody available at the same time? I work with some people out on the West Coast, and everything for them in the middle of the day is like 6 o'clock at night for me. So those are the things that kind of factor in as well too. Is like, is this going to work for my business? If everybody's not even on the same time zone, is it still within working hours? Are they available to talk to the clients here if they're, on a totally different schedule? And some people are like, oh, sure, I'll wake up early, well, that sounds good in theory, but
right. And who doesn't want to go out and work in California and, sit in San Francisco and have perfect weather year round? But what we have to think about is, for us in Ohio, overtime it happens in a week, right? Past 40 hours. In California, overtime happens in a day. And that is an extra layer of management. So understanding the impact of letting your employees go and work from anywhere can be costly to you as an employer. And you have to figure that out as well. And I think, quite honestly, if you're going to be a remote company, that has to be part of the onboarding discussion, if not the interview discussion. So people understand the impact of movement. I have an employee in Georgia. She wants to move to Florida next year. She has future visions of becoming an owner of a lot of real estate and retiring at like 30. More power to her. So, she's got this big vision of what she wants to do. I found out through the grapevine she wanted to move to Florida. So I have to prepare for that. Workers' comp, unemployment, withholding. Am I going to have to follow sick leave laws down there that we don't have in Ohio? Again, Ohio is a pretty business-friendly state and a pretty hands-off state in the overall scheme of things. So as an employer, you really need to understand your remote obligations. So those are my big pieces of things to think about.
Absolutely. And I think those are all really important. I mean, if people have questions for the chat, feel free to drop those in. We're actually getting close to the top of the hour. So we're going to, I think, just try and focus on a couple of the main points we want to hit, because I think the conversation's been, really robust, and we've been, tearing through a lot of stuff. But just going back to some of the other things, again, everything is outlined, and even more so in the white papers you'll be receiving. But really talking about in that onboarding process, that 30, 60, 90 days and beyond, it's not going to necessarily be a 30, 60 second. So really, I mean, can we just talk a little bit about what that might look like while we're wrapping up, the check-ins over the course of an onboarding period?
Um, I would say have them scheduled and commit to keeping them, and don't let other things throw them off the calendar. It's so
Mhm.
easy when people aren't in front of you to ignore those appointments, to reschedule those appointments, to push those appointments out. And I just think you have to, again, it's that deliberateness that you're going to have in place
I'm going to
and
agree. And I think that
follow.
comes from leadership. Don't expect anybody to kind of do that for you. I can tell you that, just some of the things that have worked for us, because, I believe that I'm not just going to tell you what to do, but this is from experience. The one thing that we do every day is we meet with our team daily, and you can decide if you need to do that as well. But what I like about that is I think it sets the stage for everybody's day. People have a chance to, engage in conversation. They can offer suggestions, they can offer help, but they're essentially just going through the status of our jobs. They're talking about what they plan on getting accomplished that day. Everybody's listening in and just saying, what about this? Have you thought about this person? And there's a lot of collaboration in just a matter of 30 minutes a day. And your team can decide, if that's too much, too little. But for us, just that way to start the day, it's almost like, everybody standing around having their coffee and, having a conversation. So that has worked out really well. And, Kristen, I'll have you chime in on some of your favorite things. But my other favorite thing is where we have weekly scheduled check-ins with teams and with individuals. And those are rock solid. They do not change. You will meet with Kristen, with your team leader, for 30 minutes or whatever. And we're going to talk about issues you might have. We can talk about your goals. We can talk about, you meeting your goals, exceeding your goals, not hitting your goals at all. Are you having a problem with your computer? It's all of those things to be covered. And that person never feels like they're being left out there. We also have a Slack channel that, people can reach anybody at any time. So if somebody is just sitting there and waiting for a response, they can find help from somebody in the Slack channel. They can talk about wins that they've had, but it is about communication. And honestly, I feel like our team's never been so close. And we used to all be in the same office, but because of this newfound communication and checking in and helping, it has done, and I think, a world of good for all of us. And I think it has helped the company out a lot too. So I'm going to stop talking, Kristen, and let you add anything else you would like to on
Well,
that.
I mean, I agree. I think all those things, like on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis, those have all really helped. Just people still maintain some of that connection, collaboration that I think, companies worry about losing. We also have chat. Like, we have so many ways people can reach each other, and different people gravitate to different things. I have people that chat me, people that email me. That's fine. All of the above are available. And I also wanted to just touch a little bit on what you said, Sharon, about those like 30, 60, 90, check-in points in the onboarding process too. Like, if you think about it, early on in this conversation, you said, put yourself in the new employee's shoes. If you think about it, if you're that new employee and you have these meetings that were scheduled on your calendar, and you're going to meet with your manager and talk about how you're doing, and then it gets moved and canceled. I mean, what kind of message? There is no other message that's going to overcome what the message you just sent to them. You're not that important to me.
Right.
Because I cannot carve out an hour to talk
Right.
to you about how you're doing. I mean, that just kind of says all they need to know. So yeah, you might have to move it. I mean, if you have to move it, you have to move it. But like, don't cancel it, for goodness sake. It's just that taking a moment to see it from their perspective, I think, can really help. Like, remember when you were a new employee? We all were new employees at some point in our career. Like, remember how that felt, and just try to put yourself in the shoes of this person and what they might need or be feeling or wondering or thinking about. If you just take that moment, I think that will guide you really well.
Right.
And again, in all fairness to the managers and the supervisors out there, they are notoriously an undertrained level of the company, even in non-remote situations. Now add on the added challenges of managing remote employees. So they may be
But do
poorly
you
trained
think
to be supervisor
there's
or
more
manager.
training required?
I do. I think you're going to see a lot more emotional intelligence or EQ training happening, to figure out how to read the room or read the virtual room, as it may be. I think we're going to have to train our managers on how to pick up cues, have conversations differently. We're missing a lot of that face-to-face cues that we work off of. But again, it's just a notoriously undertrained, underdeveloped group. We put people in management positions because they're great technicians. We forget we have to train them how to be managers. Now we have to train them how to be managers of remote teams that might be in different time zones, that we're going to be doing more one-on-ones with than maybe groups or just stop by the office situations. So yeah, I do think we have to do a lot more training and development of our managers and supervisors.
Yeah, and if you are an owner or if you are a manager, and you see that need, definitely speak up. I'm going to assume if you're in a management position, your boss thinks very highly of you and would not mind you getting some training on how to be a better manager. And but I do think that's something that people at the top need to recognize as well. How are things going with onboarding people? Because it costs you money to constantly hire and fire all the time and then get the equipment back and, buy more desks and things like that. So it is really important to be on top of that. And maybe even just when you're doing your check-ins with your management team, asking them how they feel about their situation when it comes to managing the team remotely. Everything has changed. And I like to always tell people, like, this is all new to all of us now. So there's no bad questions or there's no bad suggestions. So what is it that you need? Because we're all kind of learning this together.
Yeah.
Definitely don't be shy to ask.
On day one, do you guys hand to your employees a 1-year development plan or onboarding plan, or have anything
We
that you
don't
give them
hand
like
them
that?
anything now. We are not that far mapped out. I thought that was really interesting. I think you had mentioned that before. We map out the first 90 days, and it's much more detailed the first few weeks than the
Right.
last month, obviously. But the first couple days are like, literally, here's your schedule. Here's on your calendar. But we map out probably about the first 90, and then we do quarterly check-ins with everyone on our team. So they just get kind of put into that quarterly check-in cadence. But
So you're already a year out.
Yeah, and forever, quarterly forever.
Mm-hmm,
But I think that idea of knowing where you need this person to be in a year, it's a great one. I think that development piece is a big one that, like you said, is going to become even more important. We can't just leave people
right.
they're flailing on their own.
So here's an easy way to think about this. When we do job analysis, write job descriptions, we do it in terms of the typical work cycle: daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually. So that you can go all the way out annually for those cycle pieces of their job that are going to happen annually. That last annual meeting can happen before those annual due dates of their job cycle. So you're right that the further out you get in that year time frame, kind of the more sparse that plan's going to look. But there are check-in meetings with the CEO that could happen, with their manager that could happen, with their different functional areas of the business that happen related to their work cycle that could happen. So you can do it, and again, it requires deliberate thought.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And I do like the longer plan too, because we are talking about humans here, and they change through the course of the year, and just keep touching base with them to make sure that they're getting what they need. I mean, it could change, within 6 months, within 6 weeks. But always having those check-ins, I think, can really keep people engaged, and nothing's going to get too far off the track if you're constantly checking.
So
And
Sharon, I was going to ask you for a last final tip, but I feel like you just said it. It's being deliberate.
Mhm.
Like that's everything we're talking about, is being deliberate about this
I
And I
agree.
like
and planning
idea of
everything about it.
I like the idea of the schedule too being included in those onboarding papers. Like, here is the map for the next 30, 60, 90, hundreds of days, or a consistent meeting. Like, and after this, we're going to meet every, month or whatever, but have it all mapped out so they know that they're going to have these touch points, and they're not just going to be set adrift once they get put in the dinghy and kicked off the dock.
And the minute you do that, you've moved from hiring to retention as well. And
Yes.
you've
Yes.
by committing to look ahead for them, they feel more connected to you. So their tendency to jump ship may reduce tremendously because they know they've got a relationship with you for a year as it's mapped out on this plan.
No,
It's
that's
not always
that's really
perfect,
good.
but
That's really, it's again talking about your big dreams on the honeymoon. I have plans for you.
yeah, there you go.
I wanted to kind of wrap this up by letting everybody know that this has been recorded and it will be available to everybody to review. You'll also be able to download a white paper based on this discussion that includes a checklist of how to onboard a new remote employee. So it will cover this and many other things. And who doesn't like a checklist? And I would like to give everybody a last chance to ask a question. You can definitely unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Otherwise, I think that's kind of wraps up, at least as far as our discussion goes. But I am more than happy to entertain some sort of crazy question that's kind of thrown out there. If not, any further thoughts, either Kristen or Sharon?
I love the white paper. It is
I'll
not
definitely
only
check it out.
beautiful, but it's informative. So thank you for putting that together. And I think people will benefit tremendously from it.
Cool. I'm very glad you said that because a lot of love went into it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's easy to follow. It's a great tool.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sharon, for joining Kristen and myself today. We really appreciated your expertise.
My pleasure. Fun. It was fun.
And on screen is everybody's the way that you can connect with everybody. So feel free to ask us questions later, because if you're like me, I sometimes think of questions a couple hours after an event, but that's how you get a hold of us, right there. And everybody, most of everybody that's signed in, I think knows how to get a hold of most of us anyway. But if you're watching this in the future, I doubt any of this will change. So send questions. We love it. We're more than happy to help. So thank you,
everyone.